Welcome back, as we now discuss preparation for confined space entry. Regulation 5, Part 2b, refers to a space being isolated before entry is made. In this respect, the type of confined space would be such that isolation would be necessary. The types of confined spaces that would naturally require isolation would be those that are connected to something by way of pipes, ducts, tunnels, and possibly electrical devices. Such a space might be a mixing vat, forming one structure in the composition of a process plant. Let us then assume this scenario for purposes of our explanation. In the usual course of events, companies that have such plant would use a permit-to-work system, which is basically a standing order to be adhered to whenever the need to enter a designated confined space becomes necessary. A permit is most usually a written procedure and a set of instructions that must be followed by anyone who is responsible for the safety of persons entering a vessel, including the worker involved. Vessel entry is a term used in many industries, and it means any form of entering a designated, potentially hazardous space. Even the opening of an inspection cover is classified as being an entry. It is the aim of many operations to avoid any need for a person to fully enter a vessel. The inclusion of inspection hatches, maintenance covers, together with the use of specially designed tools that reach within a space through these openings, can totally prevent the need for workers to enter dangerous spaces. Even with such innovations, the vessel or space must still be isolated or totally blanked from any possible flow of product and accidental operation of ancillary equipment. Let us now, in simple diagrammatic form, consider a typical blending vat that, as you see, is fed from two product tanks. The process involves a controlled flow of liquid from each tank into the mixing vat. Inside the mixing tank, the two liquids are mixed using an electrically powered agitator. The blended product is then fed out through the bottom of the mixer and routed to a storage tank. Entry into the mixing tank is to be made through an inspection hatch. The procedure for vessel entry in such a situation could be as follows. Step 1. Stop the product flow by closing off the supply valves. The outlet valve would be kept open at this time in order to drain the vessel of its contents. Step 2. Shut off the supply pumps from both liquid tanks, then lock out and tag their electrical circuit breakers. Step 3. Switch off the power to the mixer motor, then lock out and tag the circuit breaker at the main panel. Step 4. Ensure that both supply valves to the pumps are firmly closed. For safety's sake, lock these valves to prevent them from being opened accidentally. Step 5. Blank off the inlet supply lines as close as possible to the vessel. This is for added safety and to prevent any possible backflow of residual product in the lines from entering the vessel. Step 6. Blank off the overflow line to prevent a possible return flow of product or fumes. Step 7. Close the storage or outlet valve once the vessel is completely empty. This is done to prevent any possible backflow from the storage tank. Step 8. Lock off the mechanical action of the agitator mechanism to prevent it from rotating accidentally. Step 9. The hatch can now be opened and the atmosphere inside the vessel tested. Step 10. If necessary, the vessel is now purged or inerted as required, depending on the nature of the product normally in the vessel. The procedure just described must be seen as being typical only. Specific detail regarding other vessel types may vary, and for this reason it is imperative that you follow the procedures provided on the permit to work for the plant that you intend to work in. In terms of the regulations, a confined space, which of course includes all types of vessels, may be entered without breathing aids only after the atmosphere in the vessel has been tested and evaluated and then declared hazard-free. Further, it must be ensured that the atmosphere remains hazard-free. This usually means that some means of forced draft ventilation system is installed. It is also important to remember that the atmosphere can become hazardous, for example, by the nature of the work to be done, by the introduction of substances such as paint, chemicals or adhesives taken into the space, and from nearby storage tanks or pipes. There is always the likelihood that an atmosphere can become hazardous during the duration of work, and for this reason the atmosphere must be constantly monitored. Wherever it is known that a space could become contaminated, for example from a nearby storage tank, then necessary breathing apparatus and emergency escape sets must be worn. No matter what the situation, wherever there are people inside a confined space, there must always be someone in attendance immediately outside that space. This person is known either as an attendant or a safety watcher. The primary role of an attendant is to provide assistance and to call for help in the event of an emergency. The attendant must never enter the space. A rope must be securely attached to a safety harness of those entering the space. The free end of the rope must be attended by the person outside. The regulations stipulate that an attendant must also be someone who has been trained in resuscitation methods, and that the designated equipment, which would include self-contained breathing apparatus, must be on hand immediately outside the space. From this overview, it can be appreciated that entry into a confined space involves more than one might have expected. The possible inherent dangers and risks of all types of spaces are far too numerous to mention. The best advice that we can offer, should you be confronted with an unfamiliar space, is this: if you don't know what hazards exist in an unfamiliar confined space, then don't enter. This brings us to the conclusion of this program. In other programs in this series, you will be shown how to use and care for atmospheric testing devices and breathing apparatus.